There is a kind of courage that few recognize, the courage to be alone. Not imposed solitude, but chosen solitude. What if the true sign of lucidity was precisely the desire to withdraw? What if, contrary to what people say, isolation wasn't weakness, but the beginning of an awakening? We are surrounded by voices, smiles, interactions, and yet we feel empty. What? Perhaps because most of the relationships around us are merely reflections of a scriptless social theater. A stage of masks, where the shallow is applauded and the deep is feared. And in that setting, those who think too much, feel too much, suffer too much. This video is not an invitation to permanent isolation, but a provocation. What if true wisdom lies in strategic withdrawal? What if protecting your mind is more important than pleasing the crowd? Here we'll go through the layers of this paradox between freedom and solitude, between lucidity and disconnection. Get ready to question what has always been treated as normal. Because maybe, just maybe, the world's noise is stopping you from hearing something essential, your own truth. It's curious how silence, which should be a refuge, has become an enemy for so many. When the crowd quiets and the routine slows down, what's left? The mind itself. And for many, that's hostile territory. The escape lies in notifications, in gatherings, in empty conversations. Everything serves as a disguise to avoid listening to oneself. Social noise is more than a habit, it's anesthesia for the void. Schopenhauer, who knew the weight of deep thought, once said, "Solitude is the destiny of all exceptional spirits." And perhaps he was right. Because those who think too much, feel too much. And those who feel too much see what others prefer to ignore. The constant presence of others doesn't eliminate loneliness, it only delays it. Being surrounded doesn't mean being connected. Often it's quite the opposite. And that's when the mind screams. Without distractions, it reveals itself, anxious, fragmented, noisy. But this confrontation is not a punishment. It's an invitation. A call to healing. To internal reorganization. Yet most people don't accept this call. They choose to plug their ears with noise instead of hearing what the soul has to say. There is a veiled fear of discovering who you are without an audience. And that fear is understandable. After all, being alone is more than lacking company. It's facing the mirror without emotional makeup. And perhaps true courage today is exactly that, to endure your own mind. And turn it into home. Just look at any gathering. Automatic smiles, generic questions, rehearsed answers. It's a theater with script, costume, and performance. Rarely is there an authentic exchange. And even when there is, it's brief, almost clandestine. What prevails are predictable interactions, born from obligation, not desire. Empty conversations that serve more to maintain appearances than to build connections. This daily performance has an invisible cost: soul exhaustion. Maintaining a persona takes effort, and when that becomes routine, spontaneity is smothered. Depth, that rare jewel, drowns in the shallowness of common interaction. And the most curious thing is that many notice it but stay on stage, afraid to leave and face the silence of an empty audience. Of course there is beauty in human connection. But it's the exception, not the rule. Most of the time we're trying to fill a social space we secretly know is artificial. We talk about the weather, mention TV shows, laugh out of politeness. And what we truly feel, think, or desire, we save for later. A later that almost never comes. This isn't cynicism, but lucidity. Understanding that this theater exists doesn't mean despising people, but seeing the limits of the set. And maybe that's why so many feel lonely even when surrounded. Because being together isn't being connected. It's only when the roles fall away that presence becomes real. There is a rare kind of freedom that only arises from awareness. And it begins when we realize how much the social game is shaped by insecurities. The need for approval, belonging, being accepted. All of that is understandable. But it's also limiting. Emotional intelligence doesn't deny that impulse, it disarms it. Because the more you understand the absurdity of trying to please everyone, the less sense it makes. The desire to belong weakens when you grasp the cost of constantly adapting. What's more valuable, being among many, pretending to be something, or being alone and being whole? The answer isn't simple, but for those who think deeply, it becomes clear. Freedom requires letting go of constant validation. Not because others don't matter, but because pleasing everyone is impossible and trying to, exhausting. Brilliant minds almost always share one trait: comfort with solitude. Not out of arrogance, but clarity. When intelligence meets maturity, a type of emotional independence arises that unsettles. The person doesn't bow to others' opinions, doesn't fit the mold, and because of that they often disturb. Because where there is authenticity, there is also disruption. That disruption, however, is not aggressive, it's serene. It's the silence of someone who knows their worth. It's the absence of urgency to please. It's the peace of one who lives not to impress, but to understand. And that kind of presence transforms any environment, even if it goes unnoticed by distracted eyes. There is a peace that cannot be explained, only felt. And it starts to reveal itself when we step away from the constant noise of interaction. Not literal noise, but symbolic. Expectations, comparisons, judgments, demands. This social noise, no matter how subtle, seeps into the cracks of the mind and begins to pull us away from ourselves. That's why silence for some sounds like a homecoming. It's not contempt. It's not superiority. It's necessity. Preserving mental health requires distance. The constant presence of others can be, paradoxically, an absence of self. When surrounded, it's harder to perceive your own thoughts clearly. It's like trying to hear a delicate melody in the middle of city traffic. Peace hides where noise rules. Silence is sacred to those who think deeply. It's not empty, it's space. Space to reflect, to feel, to reorganize. While many avoid it for fear of what they'll find inside, others seek it as a source of clarity. There is a kind of emotional intelligence that blooms only in stillness. And those who have tasted that serenity know, it's priceless. Being at peace isn't being isolated from the world, but knowing where not to be. It's discerning between presence and pressure, between company and noise, and understanding that sometimes, the mind only blossoms where the world can't reach it. We live in an age of excess. Of information, of sound, of images, of voices. Everything screams for attention as if silence were a mistake, not a resource. But self-knowledge, that intimate and slow process, demands the opposite: space, time, pauses. Because the soul doesn't shout, it whispers. And to hear it, the world must be turned off for a few moments. The mind, bombarded by stimuli, has no time to digest what it feels. It lives in reaction, not in understanding. And at that pace, the true self gets lost, buried under layers of content that entertain but don't enlighten. It's impossible to see clearly when in constant motion. Contemplation, that forgotten art, becomes a path to rediscovery. It is in solitude that the contours of the self become visible. When there's no one to please, uncomfortable but liberating questions arise. Who am I without applause? What do I desire without influence? The distance from the external world isn't isolation, it's perspective. The farther you are from noise, the closer you get to essence. And that takes courage. Because truth doesn't come with filters. No wonder many flee this process. They prefer the comfort of distraction to the discomfort of inner diving. But those who dare to take this path discover something rare: peace. Not superficial peace, but serenity born from meeting oneself. And it's only possible when excess gives way to what's essential. Group interaction is, by nature, a tacit agreement of concessions. Adapting here, staying silent there, a smile to mask, a gesture to avoid conflict. All of this to maintain harmony. Or the illusion of it. But there's a cost. Because the more you mold yourself to fit, the less room there is to be. And that's what suffocates the free spirit, the constant need to disguise oneself. Spontaneity in this context becomes a risk. Authenticity, a bold act. To fit in, masks must be worn and maintained. But masks are heavy. And over time, many no longer know whether they're performing or living. That's when deep exhaustion sets in, the kind that doesn't fade with rest. It's the soul that's tired of not being whole. Being truly yourself comes at a cost: isolation. But it's a fair price when you understand what's at stake. Schopenhauer preferred lonely truth to shared illusion, not out of arrogance but out of integrity. The free spirit does not tolerate living in conflict with itself. It may participate in the world, but it does not submit to it. This choice unsettles. Because where there is authenticity, there is deviation from the norm. And the norm demands conformity. But the free spirit is not rebellious for pleasure, it is coherent by nature. And this coherence does isolate, but it also liberates. Because living without a mask may push many away, but brings you closer to yourself. Just one moment of pause is enough to realize, almost everything around us is designed to distract us. From the phone to small daily interactions, we are constantly led to escape ourselves. And this is no accident. It's a necessity. Because living with intention requires presence, and presence requires courage. Courage to face what you are, what you feel, what you fear. And for many, that is unbearable. Boredom, which could be a portal to creativity or self-awareness, has become an enemy. But it only scares those who have no inner world. Those who depend on the external to feel alive live at the mercy of the next stimulus. The intelligent, on the other hand, feed on their own thoughts. They turn free time into reflection, silence into power. It's a subtle but profound difference. Living through distraction is surviving. Living with intention is awakening. Distraction is anesthesia. Intention is direction. Most people spend the day running away from their own thoughts, their own truths, their own choices. It's easier to fill the void than to face it. But the void, if listened to, can reveal more than 1,000 voices. The big shift begins when you replace "what do I do now?" with "why am I doing this?" That small shift changes everything. It removes the focus from autopilot and brings awareness to the surface. And awareness is the first step toward a life that's truly worth living. Living in society is inevitable, but how we interact is a choice, or at least it should be. Yet many remain stuck in relationships they can't stand, afraid of being alone. Ties maintained out of habit, spaces shared for convenience, bonds that imprison more than embrace. This is where human suffering intensifies, not only for being with others but for not being free in that togetherness. Conflicts become routine. Vanities clash. Egos compete for space. Forced coexistence turns daily life into a minefield. Small words become big battles. Glances, judgments. Silences, punishments. And little by little, the mind wears down, not from what actually happens, but from the constant effort of self-protection. It's an invisible but deep exhaustion. The problem isn't difference, it's lack of choice. When you can't walk away, all that's left is to endure. And enduring all the time comes at a cost. Mental health, lightness, authenticity. Being around without connection is disguised loneliness. And what hurts most sometimes isn't being alone, but being poorly accompanied and still trapped. For those who see beyond the surface, this scenario is even more cruel. Sensitivity amplifies everything. Emotional intelligence picks up on what's left unsaid. And living among people who don't see, don't listen, and don't respect each other becomes a daily exercise in resistance. That's why often distance is healthier than constant presence. There's a mistaken idea that those who pull away are fragile, that those who prefer silence to the group are running away. But in reality, there's a raw, lucid strength in that withdrawal. A practical wisdom often gained through pain. Knowing what drains your energy. Avoiding the social when needed is an act of radical self-care, not a breakdown but a strategic choice. Emotional intelligence, when matured, becomes selective. Not out of pride but for protection. Relationships that once seemed tolerable now show their toxicity. Environments that once were bearable now reveal their weight. It's like tuning an instrument. Even the smallest off note becomes uncomfortable. And the sensitive spirit begins to seek silence as an antidote. Protecting yourself from mediocrity is often an act of psychic survival. When immersed in shallow conversations, repetitive habits, and predictable behavior, something inside you screams. A discomfort few understand, but that can no longer be ignored. And then distance becomes necessary. Not out of arrogance but coherence. Not superiority but sanity. The most curious part is that, in stepping away, a person finally comes closer to themselves. They begin to notice what uplifts them, what paralyzes them, what destroys them. And that awareness, even in solitude, is liberating. Because only those who have learned to be well alone are capable of choosing to be with someone without needing them. There is a serene beauty in isolation. Not the imposed kind, full of absence and pain, but the chosen kind, a retreat from the noise, the rush, the distractions. For many this may look like escape. But for those who've touched the bottom of thought, silence is a reunion. Because sometimes, avoiding the world isn't giving up. It's intelligence. It's a return to what truly matters. The deep mind doesn't feed on constant stimulation. It needs contemplation. Space. Time to mature ideas, dissolve internal conflicts, perceive nuances that only emerge in stillness. While society chases after more connections, more presence, more movement, those who isolate seek less. And in that less they find everything. It's an almost spiritual process. Stepping away doesn't mean despising the world, but redefining your relationship with it. What's essential doesn't scream, it whispers. And only those who quiet the external noise are able to hear it. Contemplation allows you to see the world from a higher place. Not in the sense of superiority but of perspective. It's like climbing a mountain. The landscape changes and with it so do the meanings. Nietzsche said that life's greatest moments are not loud. They arrive in the silence of an ordinary afternoon, in the solitude of a room, in the exhale after a long reflection. And perhaps that's what many haven't understood. Isolating yourself is not hiding. It's finally revealing yourself to yourself. What's at stake isn't just the time we spend with others, but the quality of the presence we reserve for ourselves. Being surrounded isn't the same as being connected. And sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to choose silence, not as absence but as full presence. So I ask you, how much of your connection is truly yours? How much of your social life is a choice and how much is fear of facing yourself? And if today you allowed yourself a pause, who would you meet in that silence? If this touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here we think together, even in silence.